Hey there, friends. As you all know, we have an inauguration for Donald Trump coming up on Monday. And of course, there's a lot of weird stuff that has been going on since Donald Trump's first term. And obviously, things just keep getting weirder and weirder. Well, James O'Keefe of the O'Keefe Media Group came out with kind of an undercover expose, if you will. And I don't think it's a huge deal, but I think it adds to the content of my story here, where they uncovered I'm not going to call him a whistleblower, because I don't think anything was done wrong, but somebody from inside an organization in the federal government sent him this email, which showed a memo or a letter talking about medical personnel that was being requested for Donald Trump's inauguration on Monday.
An internal memo from the Veterans Administration surfaced containing an unusual request: support for the upcoming presidential inauguration. A high-level source inside the Department of Veterans Affairs has disclosed a memo from the Executive Director, Office of the Emergency Management within Veterans Affairs. The source inside the VA said the source deployment request did not occur for the last two inaugurations. We spoke to the source inside the VA to ask if this is something that's typical. So, can you just talk a minute about this being typical or not typical within the VA? Them doing these sorts of things for the past few inaugurations?
What concerned me was that this has never been requested before, especially not from HHS. What we have, what I saw to me was a little bit unnerving. I've been in the VA for several inaugurations, and this was the first time they have ever asked for DEMS personnel.
First time they've ever asked for personnel.
For an inauguration, yes.
Why do you think that is?
I have no idea. That's why I decided to send that memo to you, because I believe that there's something unnerving about it. I'm not 100% sure, but my gut says this is not normal, and it's not.
The memo details a formal request from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response, or ASPR. It calls upon the Veterans Administration to provide critical medical support for the event. Specifically, they sought the deployment of paramedics, registered nurses with expertise in emergency and medical surgical care, and licensed medical practitioners, including MDs, DOs, NPs, PAs, specializing in emergency medicine. The memo is signed by Derek Justad, who is the Executive Director for the VHA Office of Emergency Management. We ask, is this request part of a standard protocol for inaugurations, or is there a specific reason for the heightened medical readiness? We sent an email to the email address provided on the memo, and we have not yet heard back.
So to be clear, the only thing that looks really crazy in this is the fact that HHS has never supplied these types of personnel before, according to those in the know here. Now, they're not requesting a ton of people. They're requesting 4 to 6 people. But you have to believe that if they're tapping into HHS, they're likely hitting all these other different departments that may have these kind of people already on staff. So I doubt they're just asking for, say, 4 to 6 different people from HHS. Now, as far as the inauguration goes, they are expecting a lot of people. 200,000 for sure, and I've heard upwards to 250,000 people will be here in attendance, and that's visitors. Now, that's not including everybody else who's already going to be there, like congressmen, senators, their wives, their families, and folks like that. And then on top of that, you're going to have National Guard, law enforcement, and all those folks. Now, local security is already crying about this a little bit. Trump inauguration put security officials on high alert in Washington. I can tell you that when I was there a couple of years ago, this is 1 year after the January 6th insurrection, that the Metro Police Department, dude, they're soft. Sorry, guys, y'all are soft. I crossed the street while I was there. This big, tall Metro Police guy was just giving me the eye the whole time. I nodded at him, spoke to him. How are you doing? I greeted him nicely, and he just, no nod, no acknowledgement that I was there, except for looking directly at me. I walked down a little ways. I came back. Same thing. What's up, man? The guy just looked at me, and I asked him, because now I'm getting a little bit aggravated, you okay? Because I'm thinking, you're looking at me. I know you hear me. I know you see me nod at you, and you're just giving me this evil eye. So I say, are you okay? He goes, are you okay? Like real confrontational. It's like anybody who looks like a white Christian male to them, automatically they have believed the FBI's rhetoric and lies that we are the problem, that we are the lone wolf, that we are the ones that they need to be on the lookout for. This guy clearly had pegged me as somebody who could be a problem. Now, what was I wearing? Jeans, blue jeans, Ariat work boots, right? Not brand new boots, work boots. And a jean jacket with kind of like the fur around the collar, or not the fur, but the sheepskin, whatever you want to call it. I don't know what the fancy name is for it. So it looked like a redneck. And this guy clearly had me pegged as somebody who could be a problem. I cross the street, 2 units pull up. A little short fat guy gets out, starts questioning me, wants to take a picture of my ID. I will not let him. I told him, he threatened me with time here. He said, well, if we just call it in, or if we have to call it in rather, it's going to take longer. If you just let us take a picture of it, we'll take a picture, you can go on about your way. I'm like, well, why are you even stopping me? I've done nothing wrong. I took a picture of some bollards at a driveway just out of curiosity that I had seen. I wasn't casing the place, and I'm not a terrorist. And that was his reason he was stopping me for questioning on that, was why I had taken pictures of that. So nevertheless, I was not going to let this man, who I do not know, and he's a Metro PD, take a picture of my ID. And when I started questioning him as to why they were so gun shy and being such sissies about it, you know what he told me? Man, since January 6th, since that old January 6th, man, we just, you never know around here. And I'm thinking to myself, really? So that's how they approach things. They are candy asses. They are so PTSD'd by January 6th that they're victims. They have talked themselves into being and worked themselves into a frenzy as to being victims of an insurrection, quote unquote. Nobody's ever been charged of insurrection, even the people in jail for it. But they think they're the victims of something that likely their bosses had a hand in creating, regardless of what department of the federal government, whether it's Metro PD on up into the feds, somebody planned this, and it certainly wasn't anybody in the Donald Trump group. I think we can all agree on that. The Ray Epps, the FBI coming out and admitting that they had X amount of people, I think as little as, the numbers might be 28 that I last heard. People now they're saying they're not FBI people, but they're like informants. Like they had 28 people that they had direct connections with in the audience. Now, I want to show you a little bit more stuff that's pushing me in this direction for you to understand why I'm bringing all this up. Remember I mentioned the white Christian males that were already being pigeonholed as being the problem. They also are looking at, quote, lone actors, and this is kind of important. I want you to see 2 things on this. The first is a headline, and the second is going to be the first line of this report. This is from ny1.com. Headline, lone actors are greatest security threat on Inauguration Day. So, okay, that tells me they've identified a potential threat for Monday, right? Lone actors are the greatest threat. Then you read their first sentence in this story, and it says law enforcement is not currently tracking any specific or credible threats to next week's inauguration in the nation's capital. Well, wait a minute. How can both of these be true? Law enforcement is not currently tracking specific or credible threats, but your headline says lone actors are the greatest security threat. How can you have identified a threat when you say there are no specific threats? So again, this is them trying to mind F you into thinking that you might be the problem. They're trying to trick you into saying that there's no credible threat, which means the real threat out there, that there is no such thing, that it might be you. You might be the problem, and we're watching for you. Now, something that I want to point out to you right here. Things started to kind of hit the fan whenever the clock struck about 2:25 p.m. in Washington, D.C., on January 6th, right? And I'm all setting all this up as to somebody coordinating this, whether this is a concerted effort or just a screw up that caused a lot of the issues on January 6th of that year of 2021. So up to 2:25 p.m., almost 2:26, The worst thing that happened, and as you can see, this is from security footage from the Capitol right here. The worst thing at that point that had happened was really law enforcement. They were shooting these flashbangs into the crowd. And as you can see, you've got law enforcement that are lined up right in front of the crowd. Nobody's pushing them. There's all that room between the Capitol and the crowd right there. Nobody's running. Nobody's scampering. Everybody's cool, right? Now, an hour prior to that, almost exactly an hour prior to that, this happened.
A wave of D.C. Metropolitan Police officers show up on the east side of the Capitol. They are the first to bring in explosive ammunition rounds that they will soon distribute to officers on the West Plaza. Officer Tara Tyndall is crouched on the ground, readying CS gas rounds.
Now, she was getting gas rounds ready, but they don't use them yet. As you can see, these are the
On-scene Commander
flashbangs.
Officer Robert Glover gives the first audible authorization to deploy explosives into the crowd.
Notice the crowd is perfectly fine and the police are not in any danger. This guy throws the first flashbang. The crowd is still calm. Notice the crowd is not rushing these guys. And the law enforcement do not appear to be in any danger, and they're not panicking. This crowd was not rushing the Capitol. This clown right here throws flashbang after flashbang into this crowd who are not rushing the Capitol.
At 1:32 p.m., an officer laments that chucking grenades into the crowd is just going to make things worse.
Notice how calm the crowd is and the police.
Moments later, the same officer seems to have changed his mind and is actively searching for munitions to discharge in the crowd.
I'm coming out with smoke. That's a burner, by the way.
This is not a flashbang that he wanted to throw. This is that he just threw. But that guy pulled out something that will burn.
After not receiving approval to use the triple chaser, Officer Thau appears to be reprimanded by another officer for his use of smoke moments earlier.
I got a triple chaser on there. Yeah. I know, but this is triple chaser. I know, but this splits it. I mean, we got better.
Another captain tells Officer Thau to hold on discharging CS gas into the crowd.
This guy is dying to throw burning munition into the crowd. So they continue with the flashbangs. The crowd is still calm. Look at them. And law enforcement is in no danger right here. They continue to chuck these rounds, these flashbangs, into the crowd. Notice them just standing around. Everything's cool. There's no, quote, insurrection, and certainly no riot. Now there's some pushing against the crowd right there. But they're still not, quote, rioting. They're getting flash grenades thrown at them for about an hour. This right now is going on about 10 to 12 minutes that they're doing this to these guys. But still nobody's rushing the Capitol. Flashbang after flashbang, like kids throwing firecrackers.
So as you can see, it's a constant barrage. The video you just saw was, roughly a 5 to 10 minute issue of them lobbing flashbang grenades into the crowd. If you notice, and as you notice, the crowd was fine. The crowd was not going crazy. Were they upset? Yeah, they were a little pissed off. People keep throwing flashbangs at them, and they've done nothing wrong. There's nobody scaling the walls. Nobody's breaking windows, kicking the door in, nothing. They're all outside of the Capitol, and they're fine until this.
Rich has a 40. Rich, over here. 40.
So this guy now is loading one of those gas canisters into one of his deployment guns. I want you to see this. Look at the crowd. The crowd is fine. The crowd's not pushing through the law enforcement. They're not fighting them. They're not pushing the rails. They're not tossing anything. Look at the law enforcement. They're just meandering around. There's no threat to anybody at this point unless you get hit by a flashbang. And this guy goes to shoot and misfires. Watch this. That canister went down to the bottom. Now all the law enforcement guys are gassed. These guys just gassed themselves. Look at the crowd. They're still fine. The crowd is still standing back. Law enforcement now begins to retreat because they just tear gassed themselves. They're all trying to run for cover because there's snot coming out of their nose. Their eyes are tearing up because this idiot just tear gassed the whole crew. So everybody's getting out of place now. All the law enforcement are running for cover, leaving the crowd unattended, who is not rioting or doing anything yet. Here's a time lapse of that same Capitol camera, and I want you to watch particularly on the clock. When that clock goes to 14:25, again, that's 2:25 obviously on a 24-hour clock, but 14:25. Watch the crowd prior to 14:25. They are perfectly fine. Watch the law enforcement. Law enforcement don't show any signs of a threat. Everything's good. We just got a big crowd out here, and they keep throwing those flashbangs. You can see little pops of smoke everywhere. I line this up with the same time as this idiot who misfired the tear gas, and watch about 14:25 to the far right of your screen, down at the very, very bottom, that you're actually going to see a puff of smoke to the far right. That's not the tear gas, that's the flashbang. Right below that, at the very bottom of the screen, that's going to be the tear gas where the guy tear gassed his whole crew himself. Here we go. Now look, they're all moving out of place. As all these cops moved out of place, then the people moved forward closer to the Capitol. Remember, these same people have had flashbangs shot at them, thrown at them for over an hour at this point. These people have been harassed for an hour. And then they moved out of position, all the law enforcement did, because they tear gassed themselves. And then these people rushed a little bit forward. I'm not making excuses for anybody. I'm telling you what happened. These people had no intent or desire to, quote, riot or perform an insurrection. My guess is if you didn't have at least the 28 FBI people in that crowd, among whoever else was pushing buttons, the Rayepses and folks like that, causing this issue, those people might still have been standing off away from all this by themselves and not having any desire to go inside this building. They were coerced to do that. Law enforcement moved out of the way, cleared the way completely across the whole front of this thing. Remember, for an hour they'd been lobbing these flashbangs at them, and they had that perimeter across the front with nothing but a sea and a wall of law enforcement. They all moved out of the way because they gassed themselves. Then that barrier was no longer there. That's when the people moved forward. Now, why does that matter? Between the lone wolf threat that they keep talking about and the fact that the government at some level, I don't know what level, had something to do with the January 6th violence that ensued later on. Now, it's littered with lies, by the way. Nobody killed any law enforcement that day. That is an absolute lie. 0 law enforcement were killed that day. But nevertheless, there's a lot of stuff that took place on that day, and we know the government had certain levels of involvement by their own admission. They've already come out and admitted we had X amount of people there. You want to know something that's really screwy that has just changed ahead of this January 20th thing? That we just gave the report from O'Keefe that additional medical people have been summoned to be there for this. Heightened security, the potential threat of the lone wolves out there. Now guess what also has happened? Insurance has gotten involved. Headline from insurancenewsnet.com. Insurance policies adding, quote, insurrection and riots as exclusions. Very quietly, a number of healthcare insurance companies have added, quote, insurrection and riots to their list of excluded benefit payments, apparently in reaction to the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. It's not known if any of the actual January 6 insurrectionists, that should be in quotes because nobody was ever charged for insurrection, filed injury or sickness claims, but in keeping with insurers' strategies of limiting risk and exposure, the companies have sought to heed off any future political losses from political riots, or perhaps they're expecting some political unrest in this election year. The 2024 Cigna healthcare insurance policy excludes, quote, treatments of an injury or sickness which is due to war, declared or undeclared, riot, or insurrection, caused directly or indirectly by invasion, insurrection, riot, civil strife, or civil commotion. Now, according to this, war has been listed before, but now they've added insurrection and riots. Another thing that I would like to point out is that with all the admissions and things like that of this vaccine, I think we can all agree now that this vaccine came from China, right? I think most of us probably can agree that that was essentially a bioweapon. You call it whatever you want. We may not be at war with China, but when you put in here that it doesn't cover anything that has anything to do with war, if somehow China decides to invade Taiwan in the coming year, which it seems very likely, China has been dying to do this, not sure what they'll do under Trump, if they have the if they have the balls to do that under Trump, don't know. If they do, we likely will go to war with them. We'll officially be at war with them, right? If we're at war with China and another COVID comes out, like we just determined that this one was from China, and we think China had a hand in it, I'm not even going to give Fauci his out yet. I do believe he was involved in that, and I think he should be put in prison for treason. Would that now make COVID or the new strain or the new version of it, or the new bird flu that they manufactured in China, would that not make it a bioweapon from somebody that was served onto the citizens of the United States by somebody that we're at war with, meaning that it was an act of war and it was all of the things that happened as a result of your new COVID, your new bioweapon from China, now is not going to be covered under this same insurance policy because it would have been an act of war? I know that seems like a bit of a reach, but we are talking about insurance companies. You show me an insurance company looking to give you the benefit of the doubt and look the other way when they actually have something in writing that might actually allow them to deny you coverage. But in this case, seems like a whole lot of people are expecting something to happen on Monday, including the insurance companies.
I don't understand the point that you're making.
God save the Queen, man.
I'm sorry, I thought this was America. He's over.